Hey now, good morning. We're live here at the Los Angeles Police Commission meeting on Black Lives Matter, LAPD Stop LAPD Spying, LA Can, Youth Justice Coalition. Several activist groups are outside. There's about 50 activists that are going to be coming in just a minute.
Board of Police Commissioners, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioner Johnson, Soboroff, Figueroa Villa, and Kim are present, and we have a quorum. Number 1 on the agenda, consent agenda items. We have no comment from.
Would anybody like to point the items on the consent agenda?
Sure.
Can I get a motion?
Move to approve items 1A through I.
That's second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Opposed? No, thank you.
Okay, item number 2, commission comment.
Any commissioner comments this morning? No. Do we have any comments?
We have 1 comment card. We have Prentice Jenkins.
Prentice Jenkins, City Life newsletter publisher, activist since 1991. We have just 2 activists in here today because everybody else is over at the City Council. So I'd like to recognize Black Lives Matter, Sister Abdullah, and LA Can, Stop LAPD Spying, Hamid Khan. I'd like to also read the Brown Act. It says, Brown Act 54953, all meetings of the legislative body of a local agency shall be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of the legislative body of a local agency. Okay, also, Ralph M. Brown Act 54953-3, a member of the public shall not be required as a condition to attendance at a meeting of a legislative body of a local agency to register his or her name or to provide other information, to complete a questionnaire, or otherwise to fulfill any condition precedent to his or her attendance. Ralph M. Brown Act 54954-3, no action or discussion shall be undertaken on any item not appearing on the posted agenda, except that members of the legislative body or staff may briefly respond to the statements made or questions posed by persons exercising their public testimony rights under Section 54954-3. That is the Ralph M. Brown Act.
There are no other comment cards on this item. We're now on item number 3, report of the Chief of Police.
We're already on item.
Chief Basinger.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the commission. I just actually have one specific item I'd like to address. I had the opportunity, and frankly the privilege to, is my time up?
No,
to attend with the Chief of Police and several other members of the department the funeral services of former Chief Willie L. Williams. Many of us in the room recall the time when he came to the department as the 50th Chief of Police. He came to the department in 1992, which happened to be one of the most challenging periods in the history of our department following the civil unrest. I remember very distinctly that period of time, that era of our department. I was a young lieutenant working 77 morning watch. Actually, Chief Beck was a newly appointed lieutenant. We made it at the same time as a young lieutenant at Southeast. During that year, the city cataloged somewhere in the neighborhood of 46,000 violent crimes, 46,000 aggravated assaults, nearly 90,000 violent crimes, and nearly 340,000 Part 1 crimes. Those numbers tallied are triple what we cataloged last year. And he came to us from having been appointed as the first African-American chief of Philadelphia Police Department and came here as the first African-American chief of the LAPD. I'm very pleased and proud to serve, and I think I also speak for the chief of police and many of us who served during that era to have served during his administration, because although crime was at its highest ebb, that was a period of time when the LAPD's renaissance for community relations and community outreach first occurred. It occurred on his watch. And the chief thought it was important that we go and commemorate a life that not only well lived, but also a life that was well served. And it was our privilege to attend the services this past weekend, this past Friday in Philadelphia. There were approximately 300 to 400 that were in attendance, and it was a very, very good and fitting homegoing for former Chief Williams. Now for the report on crime. Homicides year-to-date are up 11.4%. Sexual assaults are down 8.5%. Robbery is up 15.6%. Ag assaults are up 19.4%. For a total violent crime increase year-to-date of 15.7%. Even though those numbers appear to be relatively high, I'm also very pleased to say that the work of operations and the rest of the department, along with a really good outreach to our community, we're starting to see a downward trajectory. In other words, the rate of increase has slowed dramatically over the last 3 to 4 weeks. And so, again, the numbers are still not where we want them to be, but they're heading in the right direction. For property crime, burglary is down 9%. Motor vehicle theft is up 17.2%. Burglary from motor vehicle is up 7.7%, and personal thefts are down 5.4% for a total property crime increase of 1.7%. Now that brings the total part-way crime increase to 4.5%. By bureau, Central Bureau is up 7.4% year-to-date as compared to last year. South Bureau is up 3.5%. The Valley has tallied a 6.0% increase, and West Bureau comes in at a very modest increase of 0.8%. And that concludes the report of the Chief of Police.
Thank you. Any questions? Fellow commissioners? Do you have any public comments?
Yes, sir. We have 4 comment cards. We have Princess Jenkins, Jamie Garcia, Hamid Khan, Melina Abdullah, and Lisa Hines. 5 cards.
Prentice Jenkins, published the City Life newsletter, activist since 1991. I'd like to play a clip. You have 3 people dead in 24 hours. 2 weeks ago, I stood on this podium and told you the next active shooter will be a cop or a fireman. And sure enough, here it is. Now, my colleague once called me a prophet. He said, "How do you know that?" I said, "I'm no prophet." I like the joke that I heard a couple of weeks ago. A comedian said, "I saw a fat guy the other day because I live in America and I was outside with my eyes open. I saw a crazy cop the other day or a crazy fireman the other day because I live in America and I was outside with my eyes open. I know all cops aren't crazy, but you do have them in your ranks. He proved it. And I told you that the next active shooter would be a cop. And sure enough, here it is. Mr. Jenkins, 8. Police Commission, 0. I continue to tell you, you need to check the people in your ranks. Stop looking at the crazy people on Skid Row. We already know most of many of them are crazy. And start looking at your own ranks, the ones that stalk their wives and then kill them and then murder other people."
Jamie Garcia.
So last week, it was spoken about civil conversation. So I think that, I feel like I've been a broken record the last few days, but I think it's important to kind of reiterate statistics and facts about policing and healthcare. So I wanted to just really be clear about how there's this ratio of 25 police officers to 10,000 people. And then there's this ratio of 1 doctor to 27,868 people in the city of Los Angeles. And I really wanted to personalize this to the person that's not paying attention, Mr. Pasinger. But I see that you're looking at me right now, Matt Johnson, and I want you to think about, is that justice? Is it right to have something like that in our city? In this city that proclaims to be, or, you know, with a police department that claims to be this leader? How can this police department leave people hanging in conditions like that? I mean, I don't know if you have the guts right now to answer that question or the courage, but do you think that's right? And I know that the city of Los Angeles, you know, quote unquote, has nothing to do with the public system, public healthcare system that's being defunded now based on the Affordable Care Act. It's slowly more and more money is being taken away from it. But don't you think that LAPD has no like way of taking 54% of the city's budget? And then on top of that, I learned that the federal, through the Urban Area Security Initiative for counterterrorism programs, they also in the last 12 years received $800 million. Now, the stories that I get from older nurses is that nursing used to be about bedside care, actually taking care of people. But now we're so inundated by so many people coming in, and they're coming in sicker. And I want to say, and this is really bad, that people are actually rotting, like gangrene. Like people are really sick. But you stand here and support the city council in their attempts to take money away from the community. And so the last few days I've been constantly saying this, but I really want you to sit with that fact. And I know you turned me off, but I want you to sit with this fact because I'm being very civil. I'm actually bringing statistics to you. And so I want you to take a stand and actually say, no, LAPD doesn't deserve that money. And I don't care if you cut me off. LAPD does not deserve that money. People need the resources in their community. People need to not be dying because they don't have health care.
If you want to speak on this matter, you can submit another card for a public comment.
But can you answer me for 1 second whether or not you think that's justice?
You've given some statistics in a vacuum, so I don't know.
In a vacuum?
Yes.
What vacuum?
I don't.
In the vacuum of South Central? In a vacuum of an area that experiences highest level of homelessness?
If you want me to respond, I'll respond. Otherwise, I can just have you take a seat.
Okay,
you don't want
I'm
to
waiting. This is a civil conversation. Go ahead and respond.
Right, and the civil conversation is
No, I'm waiting.
Corruption. So you've given some statistics in a vacuum. I don't know about the healthcare statistics in Los Angeles compared to other cities. I do know that the number of police officers we have in this city is significantly lower than the per capita rate.
That's a 2010 statistic.
I have a 2015 statistic on the number of officers we have.
And so how many is that? Is it comparable to the doctors?
Chicago, Philadelphia, etc. So I don't know.
Why don't you know, Matt Johnson?
Because I'm president of the police commission. I'm not president of the healthcare commission.
But have you been to a hospital to see what hospital conditions are like?
Being appointed is not on the agenda, and unfortunately, we cannot continue to have this conversation. But
and that's really unfortunate because people are dying.
Conversation I would be happy to have with you. I've offered to meet with you.
Okay, so let's go back to that. We had a meeting on the 2nd. We had a meeting on the 2nd.
I need to move on to Ms. Garcia. It is time for the next speaker.
Yeah, but we had a meeting on the 2nd that you refused to show up. Now let's put this on the record. You refused to show up to it. Yes, you did.
You need to move on.
You did. Because you wanted to meet away from the community.
The next speaker,
you refused to meet with the community.
He said it's not true that you can't really lying. Like
because it wasn't according to your control of how you wanted things to do. You showed to me
I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is your last warning.
Give another card, sister. Give another card.
Yeah, I'm going to sit down, but I just wanted to make sure we had that human eye contact.
So let's talk about the vacuum that Matt Johnson is talking about. This is an article from the Daily Breeze January 3rd, 2009. Does anybody remember 2008, what happened? The Great Recession? Millions of homes lost, millions of jobs lost, people committing suicide, right? People getting displaced, violence. So this is what the Daily Breeze's title says. LAPD's no layoff pledge draws recruits. Goes on to say that applications for Los Angeles police officer jobs surged last month as LAPD recruiters began advertising as this as one of the few recession-proof careers. The downturn in the economy has offered an upside for the LAPD, and it goes on to say. So when you talk about a vacuum, Matt Johnson, I mean, this is what fills the vacuum. What we are trying to say over here is we just spoke and we gathered outside the city hall because we were talking about a freedom budget, not a city budget, a freedom budget that frees us from the shackles of this violent organization. Last year, LAPD led the nation, and Mr. Paisinger, if you would look up so you can face the truth, last year your department killed 21 people, the most of any law enforcement agency in the country. This year, LAPD is again leading the nation of killing the most people. What do you have to say about that? 38 people were shot last year, out of which 1/3 were mentally ill. This is the vacuum that we are speaking about. This is the denial that we are speaking about. This is the gloss that we are speaking about. This is the spin that we are speaking about. Then let's not talk about the truth. And this is exactly what is happening here, Matt Johnson. When you say that you wanted to meet with us and you bailed out on May 3rd, when Bishop T. Frank is sitting right here, when we spoke to him, that yes, we want to have a meeting with him. We want to give him a chance to put a spotlight on what he has to say. But you bailed out. But you know, you can run and you can't hide because all of us are not going anywhere. All right. We're going to keep on coming back. We're going to keep on coming back. And we're going to make sure that this department at some point gets confronted. Because this killing has to stop. This violence has to stop. These conspiracies have to stop. Not only they're taking 54% of the general funds, they got $800 million from the Urban Area Security Initiative, Long Beach, and Los Angeles.
Thank you for your comments.
And you are here going to hear much more from many people.
Thank you. The next speaker, Melina Abdullah, followed by Lisa Hines.
So there's a couple of items, several items that I want to bring up. First, in fact, I shouldn't even talk to you because the last time I was here, I said we weren't giving up on you and we need you to do our work, do the work of the people. And you continue to be a liar and you continue to refuse to meet with the people. You canceled the meeting. You walked through the crowd of folks who are here today and you lied and you said that you would meet with us anytime, any place. Just a week after, you canceled the meeting on May 3rd. So you did that. So you're a liar. So I'm no longer talking with you because you're a liar. And I guess we should have been familiar with your lies because that's what you do professionally, right? So, for the people, I want you all to know this.
Would you like me to address that?
Not if it's part of my time.
Pause the clock.
And I need 10 more seconds.
Can you have 10 more seconds? Mr. T-Frank, have we not always been consistent that I would be willing to meet with 2 members of each organization or each organization separately? That's correct, sir. So we've multiple letters back and forth where we've said that that's how we would do the meeting.
That's a lie. We had a meeting for May 3rd that was set, and then it was canceled.
And for that meeting for May 3rd, Mr. T-Frank, weren't we clear that it would be 2 members of each organization?
No, that's not what was initially
conversation with Mr. Khan, that was the information I provided him.
When you called to find out what the agenda is going to look like.
Canceled, that's the information that was given, but that was not what was initially negotiated. And I know that you
I'm being told that this is not on the agenda, so we cannot continue.
He's a puppet.
You made your lying.
He's a puppet.
So he put his lie on the record, so we should all remember that he lied on the record, and he continues to lie on the record. When he canceled the meeting, he said, that's when he said 2 people per organization. Why are you scared to meet with the community? Why are you scared to meet with the community? We don't want to meet 2 people per community, per organization. We are all here together. You should be running from the people. You're supposed to represent all the people, not 2 people per organization.
That's right.
So again, I'm going to speak to the people.
Yeah.
We submitted a letter 2 weeks ago asking for information from Matt Johnson. We asked for copies of the video footage and photographs of Waukesha Wilson, who was murdered in LAPD custody. We asked for all logs of people entering and exiting her cell. We asked for a complete description of the notification policy. I understand there'll be a report today around that. But we asked for those things. The response that we got back was he doesn't have direct access to those things. The LA Police Commission is an oversight body. He can request that information from LAPD. Right. But since he's refused to do it, we're requesting it of LAPD. So this is for Assistant Chief Paysinger. We know that you have those items, and so we want those items. We also want to lift up that you are not going to ride the work of the people and pretend like it was your doing. It was not your doing to have a notification policy conversation. We demanded it. It was not your doing to have a de-escalation policy. We demanded that you stop killing people. And so instead of running from the community, what we're asking for you to do is engage with the community. And if you don't, we will engage you in ways that you don't like.
All right.
That's not a threat, that's a promise.
Say her name. Waukesha Wilson. 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 Say her name. Waukesha Wilson.
The next speaker, please, Lisa Hines.
My name is Lisa Hines. I'm the mother of Waukesha Wilson.
Her mic's not on.
Week after week, I've been attending these meetings, and I still haven't received anything. Matt Johnson, Chief Beck, nobody on this board can tell me anything. I don't understand why. You know, my daughter was killed March 27th. I lost my job because I couldn't go to work because I was a wreck. Now I have no income. And that's not you guys' problem. But I'm just saying, if I had some kind of information, I could have told my employers, let them know what was going on and why I had to be off. I had to be off because I had to keep trying to get information on what happened to my daughter, because I'm not going to rest until I know something.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm just asking, put yourselves in my shoes. If this was your child, any one of you guys' child, how would you feel? Just think about that. When we meet next week, can somebody give me an answer? That's all I'm asking. Can somebody tell me if the roles were reversed, I'm in your shoes and you're in mine, how would you be feeling? Not knowing what happened to your child. All you know is she was arrested by LAPD, talked to her 15 minutes Sunday, Easter morning, and found out 4 days later she died maybe 20 minutes after you talked to her. Mm-hmm. Didn't nobody notify me. I had to keep calling. I had to call and call and call to find out she had passed. I'm just asking. Think about my question and maybe next week, hopefully somebody can give me an answer. I haven't slept. I haven't eaten. Because my mind is racing. And I don't know how any human could do that to anybody, any parent. What kind of people are we dealing with?
Say her name! Waukesha Wilson! 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 Say her name! Waukesha Wilson!
We have no other comment cards for item number 3. We're on item number 4, regular agenda items. Does the Commissioner wish to pull any item of special for A?
Well, both 4A and 4B.
Okay. Begin with 4A, Department's verbal presentation and discussion relative to the investigative processes and death notification procedures of Force Investigation Division.
morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
As you know, my name is Ara Polycron. I'm the Director of Constitutional Policing and Policy for the LAPD. Seated with me is the Commanding Officer of Force Investigation Division, Commander Bob Lopez. We've been asked today to come before the Commission as part of our effort to help educate both the public and answer questions from the Commission about the types of investigations that are done when any LAPD officer uses force, specifically regarding categorical or the most serious uses of force, or other types of incidents that may not also involve force. What we plan to do today is show you a little bit about the overview, show you some of our efforts to help educate the public and the media on how these investigations are conducted, so people understand what our processes and procedures are, and open that transparency, which is very important, showing to the Commission and the Chief. And then Commander Lopez will actually go through the process and answer any questions that you have specific to investigations. Then I can assist, especially with extent to why certain procedures are in place in terms of making sure that the reforms in the consent decree continue to be implemented, and to make sure we maintain the integrity of the investigation so that you, the district attorney, and others can make judgments based on all the evidence that's presented to you. So what we'd like to do is, in the first slide, is actually show you a short clip of an event we had at Davis.
To the scene of a crime in progress, guns drawn, a suspect hit. This is just a drill. It is also an attempt by the LAPD to spark a national conversation on policing. Today, the department played out an officer-involved shooting and offered us an unprecedented look at how these cases are investigated. NBC4's Patrick Healy was there and is live tonight at the LAPD's Mission Station. Patrick.
Colleen, it was pretty extraordinary, the access we're given to this demonstration put on today. Chief Beck believes that providing a closer look at how LAPD responds to officer-involved shootings will focus attention on the issues he sees as paramount. In LAPD's simulation village, we saw two guys on the sidewalk, then a patrol car approach. Remember, simulation. It was over in just seconds. A simulated officer-involved fatal shooting. LAPD's Force Investigation Division responding, deploying as many as 10 detectives.
I've never seen a video that looked like that.
Having the involved officers
I fired my gun through this opening.
and interviewing prospective witnesses, whose accounts varied widely.
It happened to you guys.
It's a procedure we've watched from outside the police tape in the real world. In today's simulation, not every witness saw the suspect point a gun at the officers or heard them shout a warning. As our video shows, that is what happened.
And as I mentioned, this was open to media at our Davis Training Center. And although we've had discussions and we've done presentations to members of the media about our processes and procedures, this is the first time we have provided this type of access and actually did a simulated officer-involved shooting. What FID also did was, after the shooting occurred, which there was no warning that it was going to happen, we took members of the press who were selected to be witnesses. We separated them, did individual interviews of what they saw or didn't see. And then afterward, when we had a debriefing, we went through what those statements were. And it was quite interesting to see the contrary views and the conflicting testimony, if you will, between them. And I pointed out these are with trained observers, being members of media from both print and television and radio who were there. And it was a good way to illustrate some of the challenges that FID has when we're trying to find out what exactly occurred in these instances. It's not as simple as just asking a few people or even the officers because of perceptions, or even collecting whatever surveillance video or other video. It takes quite a bit of time to assemble all these facts and, of course, do all the forensic analysis that's necessary. So this is the first in a series of events we plan to have opportunities for not only the media to come in and see how we do some other training and other types of investigations, but we plan to do this particular type of event for community members to come in. This was just a short part of it. We also went through the adjudication process and how that works. And we also, as part of the day, we split them up in two groups. So at this time, another group was getting briefings and able to see some of the less lethal the implementation of some less lethal, including taser, beanbag shotguns, and actually have an opportunity to operate those weapon systems as well. So this was the first in what we hope will be many of these opportunities for people to get some unique insight into what Commander Lopez will be talking about today. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Commander Lopez, who will talk about FID and their investigations.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Just want to go through a little bit of what FID is all about. You know, we are under Professional Standards Bureau. Our boss is Deputy Chief McCarthy, who is a direct report to the Chief of Police. And as you can see, I have several sections within FID: the admin section, the CRIM section, ISU, CAT, and ISS. And I'll be providing some more information as to what each of those teams does in a categorical use of force investigation. There are 4 lieutenants that are assigned. 3 of them are here with me today. There are over 50 detectives who specialize in and are subject matter experts in categorical use of force investigations. The FID is made up of approximately 80 individuals, which include the detectives, the lieutenants, police officers, and civilian staff. So, as you can see, the Force Investigation Division is the sole entity that is responsible for investigating all aspects of categorical use of force incidents and any other investigation at the direction of the Chief of Police. So we've done a few investigations with the Chief of Police at his direction, and we continue to do those kind of investigations. As far as the department, it views two categories: the categorical and the non-categorical investigations. The non-categoricals are done by area supervisors in the field, and the categoricals are done by FID. And so you ask, what is a categorical use of force incident? Here are all the incidents that we investigate. And when you talk about the pursuits, if it's for the pursuit culmination in an officer-involved shooting, we do the investigation of that as well. Also, on restraint control holds, in custody deaths, and that's specifically with cases where the death of an arrestee or a detainee who's in the custodial care of the department. Law enforcement-related injuries, that's any injury as a result of a use of force by department personnel. Head strikes with an impact weapon, as you can see, the Aspen, the flashlight, and any other impact device. Canine contact requiring hospitalization. Again, those are the incidents where one of our canine bites an individual, and then they are hospitalized as a result of that bite. In addition, we also have an MOAs, or a Memorandum of Understanding or Agreement with LAFD, USC, UCLA, and Airport Police, or we do the investigations for them as well.
Before you move on, Commander, if I could just mention one thing. As you may know, categorical and non-categorical is a term of art that's used only by the Los Angeles Police Department, was defined under the consent decree. And it's a bit of a misnomer because we call it a categorical use of force. As you know, some of these things that are listed here actually do not involve any use of force. For example, an in-custody death. That is a death that occurs during any time that a person is in the custody of the LAPD, whether it's in the jail facility or being transported, etc. And FID investigates that simply because there was a death in the custody. It's obviously a tragic and a serious situation, and we want to have that level of investigation. The real distinction between a categorical and a non-categorical is not necessarily the level of force, but the real distinction is the type of investigation, who investigates, and who adjudicates. A categorical, as you know, all come before the police commission or adjudicated by the police commission. All categorical incidents are investigated by FID. All non-categorical are usually lesser uses of force, but are investigated by supervisors and adjudicated through the department, and ultimately determine whether it can be in or out of policy. And of course, discipline can result as that, just as discipline can in a categorical. The other important point to note here is that some of the determinations of whether it's an FID and a categorical are not up to either the department or even the incident itself. And those are with respect to hospitalization. Hospitalization means a doctor admits the person who was involved in law enforcement-related injury or et cetera into the hospital. And that can often be, as you know, completely unrelated to whatever injury they may have sustained, if they sustain any injury. So for example, if somebody goes into diabetic shock while they're being transported to jail on a misdemeanor warrant, they would be taken to the hospital, and if they were admitted, that admission could result in a categorical investigation. Or if there was an injury sustained during use of force, they could be admitted because they have a heart problem, and then that would be. I also mentioned that, and Commander Lopez can talk about it, because that creates the logistical problem of we don't know that it is a categorical until they're admitted to the hospital, because the nature of the interaction wouldn't necessarily cause an automatic response by FID. There's not a discharge of a firearm, there's not a carotid restraint hold, those types of things. And oftentimes there can be somewhat of a delay before FID comes, and then the ability to preserve the scene and collect the evidence that we would in those situations where there has been a discharge of a firearm.
Along the line
is an active force and an expression
Please,
of power.
no disrupting the speaker. If you disrupt the speaker, you're going to be asked to leave.
Sir, along those lines, when you're talking about the hospitalization, oftentimes I'll send lieutenant and detectives to talk with the doctor, and they're generally admitted for observation, but they're not actually, or they're being held for observation. I don't want to use that term, but they're being observed for their injuries, and oftentimes it can take anywhere between 4 to the following day before the hospital actually admits the individual into the hospital for that injury. So we're waiting in those periods of time to determine whether or not we're going to handle it as a categorical. So a lot of times like I said, we're in a waiting holding pattern. We're trying to get as much information from at the onset of these investigations so we can prepare whether or not we're going to either handle it as a categorical or pass it on to the division to handle it as a non-cat level 1.
So just to give some context, I know there were 48 officer-involved shootings last year that were obviously all categorical. How many total categorical incidents were there that were investigated by FID last year?
I have those numbers. Last year we had 97 incidents. Just to give you a perspective, in 2011 it was 112, 2012 was 84, 2013 was 95, 2014 was 73.
Commander, does that include animal alliances?
Yes, that includes the additional investigations that we also do. So those investigations get a tremendous amount of resources assigned to them in order to conduct those investigations. These are the additional investigations that we also conduct, the tactical, non-tactical, unintentional discharges, animal shootings, warning shots, any other incident at the direction of the Chief of Police.
And I should mention that the chief has used that, as you know, in some cases that have been adjudicated where, because of maybe the complications of the circumstances or needing to have an additional review, that the chief has directed that they be investigated and adjudicated as a categorical use of force, even though it may not meet the basic criteria, and he has that under policies that are implemented to make that decision. So taking essentially what's a non-categorical use of force and investigating and then submitting it to the commission to be adjudicated as categorical.
As far as who responds to these incidents, we have an on-call lieutenant, the investigative team, which can be anywhere between 6 to 8 detectives, the criminal apprehension team, investigative support unit, and additional investigators if I need additional investigators because of the number of witnesses that we haven't seen or the number of officers involved in the incident. Additionally, there's other folks that respond to these incidents, which includes our command staff, the District Attorney's Office, Crimes Against Police Officers Section, and JSID, Justice System Integrity Division, the Office of the Inspector General, and for the majority of the time they're present with us. Forensic Science Division, Technical Investigation Division, and the Officer's Attorney Representatives. The requirements of the categorical use of force incidents came about as a result of the consent decree and the federal monitor and the federal judge who put this all together and held the department accountable for the way we conduct those investigations. So as you can see that one of the primary things is to have the Inspector General at scene and provide him access to the entire scene and access to the entire investigation at the onset. In addition, we also cooperate with the DA's investigators and the DA that is assigned to the incident, especially in the incident where somebody sustains a serious injury or a hit from an OIS. Again, all interviews are tape recorded. And in addition to that, the interviews are done so that it's convenient to the witnesses.
And part of what we'll get into is the timing of these investigations. I should note when you conduct all these interviews, whether they're the officers, witness officers, or other witnesses being tape recorded, they are also all transcribed. And that takes a considerable amount of time and obviously some resources to do that. That can often be part of the delay in being able to wrap up the investigation.
In addition, these investigations are to be investigated by supervisors. They're concurrent investigations of both the administrative and the criminal investigations. Again, it requires notification of the day with an OIS with hits and also involves shooting with hits or injuries. And again, in custody deaths where force has been used, and also where there's probable cause to believe that there's a criminal culpability of the officer. Again, the specifics are that only detailed interviews are being conducted by FID investigators because, again, we tape record all the interviews. And again, talking about as far as the suspect, the questioning of the suspect is really limited by anybody else other than the FID. And then, as you have seen in some of the reports, in the reports that we produced, we addressed the inconsistencies in both the officer statement and the witness statements. And in addition, we also look at the command and control of the officers present or the supervisors present, which could also include command staff to respond to these incidents. So as you get into the criminal investigation and the bifurcation duties of the crim section, it's the criminal culpability of the involved officers, and they're responsible for completing the report absent the compelled information or the compelled interviews of the involved officers to the DA's office for review. Generally, within 7 days after the administrative report is submitted, we generally try to submit those.
Can you just talk a little bit about that, about the fact that for the adjudicative process, you're entitled to compel statements from the officers and how we have that information with respect to our adjudication, but that's not something that the district attorney has.
Certainly. Because of the law that provides everybody under the Constitution a privilege against self-incrimination, including public employees, when there is a criminal investigation that's being conducted, everybody has a right to basically plead the Fifth Amendment. The way that's addressed based on the U.S. Constitution, California Constitution, is that is true when it comes to a criminal investigation, but if it's an investigation of an administrative nature, in other words, a personnel action, a department can compel that person, that police officer, to speak, but all of those statements, because they are compelled, cannot be used against them, or the fruits of those statements can be used against them in a criminal prosecution. As a result, there are two different teams by FID, and there's actually a third we'll talk about in a second, that conduct parallel investigations. But one has access to all of the compelled statements, and one is kept clean and does not have access to those statements, and it has to be separated. Commander Lopez can talk about sometimes they do merge at a certain point, but at the very initial stages, because we don't know the full circumstances and we want to be able to preserve the ability to present a case to the district attorney's office for possible prosecution, we have two separate teams. So compelled statements obviously are when the officer is interviewed by FID, they have a lawyer or representative, and they are actually directed to provide a statement at the order of the chief of police, and only the chief of police can provide that order because he has, in this case he, has the power to discipline. Because that authority to compel must also be associated with the authority to impose discipline, because if the officer refuses an administrative investigation, they can be held insubordinate and then be directed to a board of rights for possible termination. That's a very important thing. As you may know, I was a federal prosecutor for 10 years, and this issue of making sure that you have a clean team is very important, because tainted by the statements, and it is the same thing if, for example, the department in a criminal investigation finds attorney-client privilege information. You have to have a bifurcated system so it's not tainted. The same exact concept. It's very important to maintain the integrity so that you don't have that taint, so it can be presented at trial, if necessary, to obtain a conviction. The third part of this, just to confuse it a little bit more, is what Commander Lopez will call a criminal apprehension team. The criminal apprehension team, though, is a separate team that is looking at, for example, a suspect who fired at the officers. The officers fired back, and either they survived or they may have fled. A team that goes to try to find that suspect for possible prosecution. It's not related to the officers themselves. So they're actually from FID resources, and this is why it's so resource intensive. He needs a team to do the administrative investigation. He needs a separate team to do the criminal investigation. And oftentimes he needs a separate team to do the criminal apprehension investigation. And that does not include the DA's office or the Inspector General.
I just wanted to highlight the fact that from a personnel adjudicative perspective, which we do, we have the benefit of having that statement as a part of the evidence we look at.
Absolutely, yes.
And as for as we spoke about the administrative investigation duties of the duties of the detectives, they obtain a public safety statement from the supervisor who responds to the scene. And again, those are 9 questions, and I can give you the 9 questions that are asked if you'd like. They conduct a walkthrough of the involved officers. They review, of course, all the digital in-car video and body-worn video that is available at the time. They interview the officers that fired their weapons. And then again, they present the investigation to the onset to the chief of police within 72 hours, the use of force forwarded to the Board of Police Commissioners.
One thing about the public safety statement, just so within the context of compelled statements, there is an exception under the law that immediately after an incident, you can ask a question of somebody who is possibly subject to an investigation, and those statements are obtainable without the presence of an attorney or it's an exception under, I believe, the Police Officer Bill of Rights. But those are very limited questions. Those questions tend to be, where did the rounds come from? Are there any outstanding suspects? How many rounds were fired? Those types of very limited questions, so that the responding officers have enough information to ensure the safety of the public and be able to apprehend anybody who may be involved in a crime.
So in addition, the administrator, all the detectives that respond to this incident walk the crime scene to glean as much information as they can so they can begin their investigation. So the investigation begins with the walking of the crime scene and also the public safety statement. That kind of gives us a general understanding of what we're dealing with, and then we can adjust to bring additional detectives or personnel to help. Again, the criminal apprehension team, again, they're doing the investigation for the prosecution of the suspects who commit crimes against police officers during these incidents. In addition, they do the arrest reports, the booking, the case filing, the related follow reports, author related warrants, and then they investigate if there's any other crimes preceding the OIS. If there was a robbery, the CAT detectives will also handle that investigation as well, just because of the evidence and all the witness information that we're going to put together, so that when we present this case to the DA's office, it's all encompassing. Additionally, I have the investigative support unit. These are officers who are dedicated to diagramming the crime scene in conjunction with the firearms analysis unit. They use a total station and a Leica scanner, which are laser scanning equipment. They do all these PowerPoints, including this one, and they also facilitate the officer weapon exchange, so that the officers, when they discharge a firearm, we take the firearm from them, provide them with an exchange weapon, and then their firearm is test fired and examined to make sure that it's within the department specifications. As far as the total station, here's the total station that has been doing our initial crime scene diagrams. This is what a diagram looks like at the beginning of this investigation when they're producing it. This is the result. Additionally, we have a Leica scanner, and the Leica scanner is courtesy through a generous donation of the Los Angeles Police Memorial Foundation. They provided $120,000 to purchase this piece of equipment. And these are the points that this scanner does. It not only scans with a laser, but it also photographs the scene. So this is how it looks as it progresses through the process that the ISU folks do for you. And then lastly, but not least, is my ISU folks, ISS folks. I mean, they are my civilian staff who not only do a variety of administrative processes like the timekeeping and those kind of things, but most importantly, they review my cases for as it's presented as we move forward through the review process. And here's some of the facts, the category use of facts that we look at on average. 85 administrative investigations, 40 criminal category use of force investigations during the year. That again, the numbers I gave you vary depending on the amount of incidents. Generally, at a crime scene, we can spend, or the detectives can spend anywhere from 15 to 20 hours at a scene to document, canvass the scene for witnesses, and anything else and work in conjunction with the firearms analysis unit, who spends an extraordinary amount of time at the scene conducting bullet path analysis, trajectories, rendering the weapon safe of a suspect. A list of about 14 different examinations that FAU does for us in a officer-involved shooting. In addition, we're also reviewing digital and car video and body-worn video and looking for any outside video that might be at scene. So during that canvassing process, they're also looking for that video. And as you've seen some of the reports that we produce, that are anywhere between 1,500 to 10,000 pages, which includes not only the admin report, but also the...
Please stop interrupting the presentation. If you interrupt the presentation, I'm going to ask you to leave.
The agenda and also the transcribed statements of each and every witness that we interview, which includes the officers, fire department, medical staff, and like I said, the civilian witnesses that we identify.
If I could just mention, because the issue of personnel required for digital and for video review and those types of things, and this is pertinent to that. So almost all of our patrol cars have 2 officers in them, and then almost all of them, at least in West Bureau now, Central Bureau and South Bureau, all have digital and video. So, for example, if you had a code 3...
This is your last warning. This is your last warning. If you interrupt one more time, you're going to be asked to leave.
And so, for example, if you have a code 3 response, you're going to have the video begin from those officers from the very beginning, and then through the entire incident. And then after, if there is an officer-involved shooting, the camera is taken from the officers by an uninvolved supervisor who responds. But obviously, in an officer-involved shooting, you're going to have additional units responding who will also have their video on. And with each ACAR, you're going to have at least 3 videos. And then all of the things that happen after that until they're authorized to be able to turn them off. So a simple incident can often have 10, 15 pieces of video footage that could be anywhere from 5 minutes to 50 or longer. And Commander Lopez's staff has to look at all of that video, because we're also not just looking at the actual officer-involved shooting, those few seconds that it may occur, but everything leading up to it, making sure all the things that were done in terms of preserving the evidence afterward, as well as looking for any tactical issues that may be completely unrelated to the use of force, but are things that we would want to make sure are corrected in any future incident. So there is a considerable amount of review that's involved in investment of resources that we have to do with this very important electronic evidence, and that is just what FID does. That doesn't include what Use of Force Review Division may do, the Inspector General, etc.
So in addition, there's it takes about 7.5 months to complete an investigation, especially because, again, if a witness identifies another witness, we identify that witness as well and cause an interview of them. Again, looking at all the digital car video, body-worn video, any other video, listening to all the audio interviews, reading the transcripts, the addenda items, all these scientific information that we have. If there's a fatality, also the autopsy report is reviewed, and they also talk to the coroner to determine the cause of death and to establish if everything that we're looking at forensically is similar to what the coroner is looking at in their investigation as well.
I should mention also that while the police department has the ability to compel any police officer to make a statement, we do not have that authority by subpoena or otherwise to compel a witness. And that often can be the biggest challenge, is getting witnesses to step forward or getting witnesses to voluntarily provide a statement. And oftentimes the witness may speak to others, and if we identify somebody, especially if they speak to the press, we will always make an effort to go and get a full interview. But that is totally at the discretion of that witness.
In addition, in some of the incidents that we've investigated, we've also asked the Inspector General's office to assign it or send an investigator with us so that they can also help to see if they can identify any witnesses for an interview as well. So that concludes the presentation as far as FID.
I'm sorry, can I just add one other point that's important to keep in mind? One of the reforms in the consent decree was the importance of separating and monitoring the officers who were involved in the use of force. And that was to avoid any concern that there could have been some sort of collusion or fixing their stories, as might be referred to, right after the scene. So the uninvolved supervisor can respond.
Back to that slide.
Go back to the other slide.
Okay, can you stop interrupting the presentation?
Back to that slide.
So something that enables us to, why don't you put it back? We'll get to this in just a moment, Commissioner. One of the things that we strongly emphasize and ensure that is adhered to is that the uninvolved supervisor immediately separate the officers and monitor them. And they are separated and monitored all the way through until their attorney, actually even after their attorney arrives and they're interviewed. And they're also given a direct order not to speak about the incident even after, except to their attorney to investigate. That's very important to maintain the integrity of the investigation and also make sure that we get their independent understanding of what occurred. One aspect of that, however, is that oftentimes, let's say that they're at the end of their 12-hour watch, they're involved in a categorical use of force, they will be separated and monitored and essentially isolated. They cannot have any contact with anybody except notifying their family that they're okay. They cannot discuss the situation, they cannot watch television, they cannot use social media, and they're monitored in the entire time. By the time the attorneys arrive, FID also needs time to prepare for any interview, watching the video, etc. It can be several hours after that. So unless the officer is hurt or so fatigued, and that's at the discretion of Commander Lopez, they will be interviewed after the incident. And that can sometimes complicate the issue about even knowing exactly what occurred from the officers. They may not be interviewed till much, much later. And oftentimes, understandably, there's pressure to talk to the media about what exactly happened, and we may not be able to know reliably from those officers until many hours later.
Thank you. I just want to make a couple points before we move on to the next section. So first of all, our FID, Force Investigation Division, it's important to note, is nationally recognized as best practices. Other departments that are looking. Yes, it is true. You're interrupting. If you have a comment, submit a card. If you interrupt again, I'm going to ask you to leave. Our Force Investigation Division is nationally recognized as being top of the class. Nationally recognized. If we can't have the meeting, I will clear the room. I will then bring everybody back in. And if we can't continue to have the meeting, we'll clear the room and we'll continue the meeting without any audience. So you can let the presentation continue. If you have a comment, submit a card. Okay, Mr. White. If you interrupt again, I'm going to ask you to leave. We've all seen this presentation before, and I appreciate you giving it again. Hopefully the audience got something out of it. We also see the reports every week, and I, speaking for myself and my other commissioners can chime in, have been very impressed with the detail of the investigation. A couple of weeks ago, unannounced, I showed up at an officer-involved shooting because I wanted to see firsthand how the investigation was conducted. And I specifically did it unannounced because I didn't want, I wanted to be just as it would occur in any event. Commander Lopez, it was the middle of the night, you were there. I know that's not something you were required to do, but that is something I hear you do on a regular basis, and I appreciate that. It's something, if my fellow commissioners have not done it, I don't know whether they have or not, I would encourage them to do it. I was very impressed with how the scene was handled, the professionalism of all the investigators, how they totally took over the scene, how they made sure the witnesses were all separated, and there was a constant dialogue of what was going on, and keeping our Inspector General's representative informed. It was an informative evening for me to be there and witness it firsthand, and it gave me even greater confidence that when these incidents occur, which are obviously something that are very important for us, for institutional integrity, to make sure we handle these properly, it gave me a high degree of confidence that we're doing. I want to say, as much as possible, you can always improve, but I was very impressed with everything that we're doing and the level that we're handling these investigations. So you're doing great work in this division.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. And if I could just mention, because I know Commander Lopez is a very modest person, he doesn't like to say this, but we get so many requests from departments throughout the country and the world to understand what we do and why. And in fact, Commander Lopez and his folks have actually put on training seminars for other departments to understand how we do it. Unfortunately, many other departments can't dedicate the resources on these types of incidents, but obviously that's been important to the city, the chief, and the commission to make sure we do that. And just to the point about improvement, I mean, quality through continuous improvement is a value of this department in every way, shape, and form, and in this area in particular. The level of review, the level of attention to these cases from the very inception is enormous, and many others, including the Inspector General, who follows on the entire investigation and actually produces in your report, of course, their opinion on the investigative quality, often has a very constant dialogue about some additional things that need to be done, of which we're always very responsive to. My office, from a completely different perspective, watches the investigations, is involved with all the briefings, all throughout, including in closed session, and we are constantly looking at ways to do things better and better all the time, especially as investigation techniques change and the advent of technologies such as body.
Along those lines, sir, we recently implemented a 30-day review. So at that 30-day review, my boss, Chief McCarthy, the Inspector General's office, my investigators, and myself sit down and we go through what we know at that 30-day mark as to what has occurred in the investigation, where we're at in the investigation, if there are any incidents or any concerns or anything that we need to focus in on or that we are focusing in on. We advise the Inspector General so that they're aware of what we're looking at. We get input from them as well as to what they would like to see in the report, or see us in which way we should go and continue the investigation. These investigations are probably one of the most robust investigations the department does. Just to indicate that along those lines, that New York Police Department recently sent a contingency of folks out here to look at our process, and they have implemented an FID at New York Police Department now. Some of the other police departments across the United States who are under consent decrees. They're also venturing here to LA to look at our process and understand how we do things and why we do things. Thank you. Thank you. So I was asked to provide some information as far as the notification procedures, as far as when we have a death that results as a result of a mechanical use of force. Normally, the coroner's office will make the next of kin notifications, and that's in our manual, the LAPD homicide manual. Again, in order to make that identification correct, it has to go through a positive forensic identification, so that we don't make a bad notification or a missed notification of somebody that shouldn't get that notification. The coroner is very sensitive about those kind of things. The process in which they do their notifications is first the spouse, then an adult child, and then the parent, if none of the others can be found. This is taken directly from the coroner's website. If you look at the website, it talks about what their notification procedures are and what falls under their guidelines. And again, it's any suspected homicide, a suicide, or accidental death. And again, the physician who's not going to sign a death certificate.
And the department that referred to is here is the coroner?
Correct. Yes, sir, the coroner. And then this is the mandates that they're under, that they're supposed to do it again. The identification methodologies are accepted forensic standards, so it's fingerprints, and they spend quite a bit of time looking at the fingerprints and trying to identify who is the next of kin that would receive the notification. And then this is the last piece, is that they do not want us to release any of the names until that notification has been made by the coroner's office.
Do you ever find it necessary to call over to the coroner's office and say, hey, have you guys done what you're supposed to do here? Are you sleeping? Are you taking too long with this? Or
we're in constant contact.
It's clearly their responsibility. It's clearly not our responsibility, except sometimes you'd say, gee, why don't you get this done? Why don't you close the circle? Do you ever do that? Let me talk, okay?
Yes, sir. There are times when, as an investigation requires, the investigative needs, we will make it. Again, it's strictly through a process with the coroner's office, and we have to advise them that we're going to make the notifications. But generally, they would rather do the notifications because of the process that they do in identifying the person that they're going to make the notifications to.
If I could, given that this has drawn some attention, understandably so, on notifications, the way the California statutes are written is that the coroner has the responsibility of doing so because they are the most capable of doing a positive identification. So, for example, if we had an officer-involved shooting, and all we knew was the identification that was on the suspect. That could be a fake ID, that could be somebody else's ID, there are a lot of things. And the last thing we would want to do is provide a notification to somebody's spouse, father, mother to say that their loved one has died when they in fact haven't. Also, because we are not going to do anything to handle the body, we don't even do the search for the ID oftentimes. That is all the coroner's responsibility. They will do that, but they also do fingerprints and live scan to determine the identity of the individual. Now, in some situations, let's say an in-custody death, where we may have some indication of identification, or we've even fingerprinted them, then the issue is, well, who with the contact information of the person to notify, because that's what the coroner will do, will find the right person to notify. And so, for example, if somebody doesn't put a next of kin or an emergency contact on their forms, we don't even have somebody who we can verify to notify. And that's oftentimes why the coroner, who has access to many more databases, especially with respect to medical records of an individual, can find out the right person to notify. I know from personal experience that Commander Lopez and his folks are in constant contact with the coroner's office and their procedures. The one exception where the department will do the notification is where it is investigatively necessary. So for example, they've identified somebody, there's some confidence that that person is that person, and let's say they were found someplace and we need to investigate quickly. They will go to the person's home and et cetera to find out when would you see the last person, et cetera, because the loss of that time as part of the investigation could potentially allow a murderer or somebody who is involved with it to get away. But that's because the department has the investigative mission to find that crime. So there are reasons why the responsibilities lie. The other different thing for LA County that's different for other counties is in most counties, the coroner is also the sheriff's department. So for example, Sandra Hutchins is not only the sheriff coroner. That connection is the same organization that would do the coroner, and so you can often have a sheriff's deputy because of that same department make that notification. LA County is unique in that it is the law enforcement agencies, including the sheriff's department, are completely separate.
I don't want to interrupt the presentation, but I had a couple of questions back on the FID, original FID part, if that's where we are. You talked to us quite a bit about what follows the designation of the use of force as categorical. And I would appreciate if you would walk through a little bit the process of determining whether a use of force is categorical or non-categorical, in particular in a situation where it's ambiguous. Obviously, if an officer fires his or her weapon, there's no ambiguity. But with respect to a head strike or other physical activity, sometimes it's less clear. And I would find it helpful, and I think members of the audience would as well, to hear you talk about how that decision is made and how it's supervised and reviewed to make sure that it's being made correctly.
Certainly, Commissioner. Of course, it all depends on the type of incident. So, for example, if it's a head strike, but it didn't initially classify as, it didn't appear to be a head strike, that decision is often made at the divisional level, unless somebody were to run it up the chain and then say, well, we may need to notify FID and make a determination. In other situations, let's say a Leary or a canine contact, etc., oftentimes that will generate a notification to Commander Lopez's folks, and as well as notification to many other people. And I can tell from some recent incidents, Commander Lopez will either contact myself, contact Commander Malinowski, the Chief of Staff, and ask us, what do we think and what would the Chief want, and then we will either get in contact with the Chief, or sometimes we just immediately direct, go ahead and investigate it as a categorical, and we can make a decision later whether it should be adjudicated as categorical. Because the key thing at the moment, at the time it occurs, is not who's going to adjudicate it, but who's going to investigate at what level of investigation. And there have been times, in fact, I think they're presented to you, where we recategorized a Leary as a non-categorical use of force, and that's just done in a formal way. But the decision of at the time, if there is ambiguity and FID has been notified, oftentimes it comes all the way often to the Chief of Police, or at least myself and Commander Malinowski.
In addition, the other things that we look at is a serious bodily injury. So that's it includes but not limited to the loss of consciousness, a concussion, bone fracture, protracted loss or impairment of function of any bodily member or organ, a wound requiring extensive suturing, and serious disfigurement. And that would be some of the things that we look at as well that would define whether or not we're going to handle that investigation or not. Oftentimes, we actually do handle them just because it's that gray area, and I'd rather to err on the side to do those investigations, and at times we do reclassify them to the non-cat level ones, but for the most part we investigate them all.
Thank you. And my other question is more general. When I'm speaking to members of the public in a forum like this, or just with friends and acquaintances, one of the questions that I get, and we hear it expressed here as well, has to do with skepticism that many people have about the ability of the police department to police itself. So in this instance, in particular, FID, Force Investigation Division, is reviewing the work of officers in the department. And when people ask me about how I can assure them that process is happening fairly and appropriately, I talk about the Inspector General in particular, because one of the roles of the Inspector General is to make sure that's happening on our behalf, on behalf of the public. I'd be interested in hearing from your perspective how you answer that question. Thank you.
Certainly. I think it's a valid question I get often. How does that work? Now, the one thing I can say, having worked with other law enforcement agencies throughout the country, LAPD has a unique system that has many more checks and balances and actual structures that help enable more review and more oversight so that it lessens something that's completely closed with the LAPD. But I think the first way that we help educate people and hopefully build that important trust is things like this, explaining our process. As you can tell, it's an arduous and sometimes complex process, but it's important and to understand why we do everything. The other factors I think are important. There are two separate entities from every officer involved shooting who are involved from the beginning. The notifications that are made are not just to command staff, but of course the Inspector General, who has a rollout team that comes immediately, is present during all the interviews, has access to all the information, and as I mentioned, will often tell FID, we think you need to do this, we need that, and then they're evaluating the investigative quality as well as the conclusions that the department has made in making recommendations to you in a very lengthy report. Then, of course, the final adjudication of every serious use of force is by the five of you, who are not employees of the department. You volunteer your time very graciously, and you invest a lot of time in reviewing these cases and making that determination. These are two things that don't exist in any way, shape, or form in most departments throughout the country, let alone in California. Only recently have they had an Inspector General in the Sheriff's Department. We have, on the other hand, had it for many years and worked through the kinks and a lot of the issues that have come there. I also think that's just very important is that we've had independent oversight oversight and mandates by a federal judge, the U.S. Department of Justice, and a monitoring team that will look at every single investigation, every single process, to determine whether we're doing it in a way that maintains the integrity of the investigation. No other department has gone through that process, especially in such a public way. And that's why one of my responsibilities and why me and my staff are so involved in these investigations is to ensure that those procedures continue where appropriate, and then we also look at other things to maintain that public trust and those reforms systemically so that it's the system that maintains the integrity and it doesn't necessarily have to be the individuals. And then the final aspect of this, in addition to the audits and investigations that the Inspector General does about how we're handling both non-categorical and categorical, audit division under my command conducts regular audits and inspections of the whole process, especially for non-categorical uses of force, which are done at the command level, that are presented to you as part of our annual audit plan and that we continue to conduct as a part of the consent decree. So I think the best way to describe this is that there are so many different things that we have in place that are law or policy to ensure that. And then, of course, the ultimate accountability for the chief of police, which is the police commission. And then I should add one other very important part, is the district attorney's office. As I mentioned before, the ultimate accountability for any public employee is if they're held accountable for criminal conduct. And that's why it's so important for us to have these separate investigative teams, the clean team and the tainted team, to maintain the integrity so that if there was criminal culpability, that the district attorney has the best opportunity to prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very high burden, but very important to hold police officers accountable. The DA's office will roll out to these cases. They are along through the entire process. Those cases are presented to the district attorney. And I should mention the district attorney has a countywide protocol for possible criminal misconduct by police officers. In that protocol, which applies to all of the police departments and agreed to by the county chiefs of police, it says that it's only required to provide it if there's probable cause of criminal conduct. The LAPD does not go by that standard. Every single officer